Good evening. Welcome to Global Dialogue, a program dedicated to an exploration of global and international issues as they pertain to us all, us locally, and in this global community of ours. My guest tonight is Professor Manu Eskandari Kajar, who I have the pleasure of calling both a friend and a colleague. He's been at this program before, and his area of expertise is the Middle East. And I thought we would talk about the deal. The deal. The deal is a proposal by the Obama administration to come to terms with the Iranian nuclear program. It now looks as if it might pass, but we wanted to find out more about why it is such a contentious issue and more about the specifics of this deal. So first, welcome once again to our program. And why is it that this is so contentious?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the program again. I suppose I must have done something right to be re-invited. And yes, indeed, it's always a pleasure to be here. Why is it so contentious? I played a clip for my students last week. President Obama discussing precisely the dynamics of what has gone on in Congress. And his own words it was on NPR. His own words were basically the contingent of Republicans in Congress are opposed to anything he might do. And so at this point, he's made the decision that he will not let that get in the way of doing what he feels is the right thing. Now, that's at the level of the political back and forth, this bruising game called American politics.
But it can't be just the bruising game that is generating the
Right.
contentiousness.
So, but there is the politics of it. We need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that one party and the other party just don't get along right now, or don't get along very well. The other thing is that there are some substantive issues, clearly, that one side or the other genuinely is concerned about. And then there are people on the fringes whose concerns are, they are trying to carve out maximal positions, which you've been teaching diplomacy, international relations. You are a student and a professor of political science and history. These are always some of the positions that come into these situations. But as people who learn something from, the way things have developed, history, the series of events that we cite in our classrooms, we all know that you cannot come in with your maximal position and expect your maximal position to be the outcome. Now, there was one such event, and that was the Versailles Peace Treaty, where the French made it a point to shove down the throat of the Germans all of the misgivings that they had from their previous loss in the Franco-Prussian War. And not that Hitler is a person to cite in any context, really, but one has to cite it in this context, truly. To the Germans, this was not called an agreement ever, it was called a diktat, meaning it was dictated to us.
Sure. And this, just to remind everyone, is the Treaty of Versailles came at the end of the First World War.
1919,
So we have that as backdrop.
Yeah, and it is a lesson in many, many ways, but it is a lesson in this. If one wants a maximalist position to prevail, one has to be a victor, an absolute victor. This is not such a position. This is not such a situation where we have one side being victors in anything, coming together with another side who is on its knees and has to accept whatever is being dictated. This is an agreement between five powers on the one hand, the European Union as an observer, Germany as a partner, and then Iran on the other side. None of these parties in here are either victors or vanquished. They are equal partners at a discussion table. And so when it comes to this, one has to realize that negotiations mean give and take. And people cannot walk away with getting everything they want.
Is that a uniquely American thing? Are we unique in demanding that out of a negotiated settlement we get everything that we want?
I don't think that it's uniquely American, but it is certainly considered quintessentially so. I mean, other countries have also done that. And when you're in a position of power, one of the first things that you want to do is to just, get the benefits, reap the benefits of the power. Otherwise, what's the point? You don't come with a superior hand to a table and then just give away the farm, so to say, mixing metaphors here. But America has that notion that it is right in its view of things, and therefore others should see the light. I'm not saying that this is a particularly adversarial agreement. The Iranians did come to the table, they did see the light. This new election in Iran with President Rouhani was a signal not just to the world, but also domestically, that Ahmadinejad's line, the previous president's line, was very destructive to Iranian interests. They have come to that realization. They know that. And so they came to a negotiation table. But they've been at the negotiation table for much longer than the Americans were involved. From 2006 on, the Iranians were already talking with the Europeans. America really came in as an afterthought in this, and America then took charge of the process, realizing that America must be involved in this. The Europeans otherwise might have already agreed on some issues with the Iranians and basically made progress. So the Iranians have been talking, and then of course, there were negotiations started under the Bush administration, but then they were aborted. So it's been a long process. The Iranians had realized a long time ago this aggressive line, this aggressive stance that they are in will not benefit them in the end. And so they have been willing to negotiate with whoever their partners would be. This is just the latest round of those negotiations.
One of the concerns expressed by opponents of this proposal is that you can't trust the Iranians, and they have repeatedly demonstrated that they cannot be trusted. Yeah. Can they trust us?
You don't negotiate with friends. You negotiate with opponents, right? President Reagan famously said, trust but verify, when it came to negotiating with the Soviet Union, right? That's what the nature of international diplomacy is all about. It's an assumption. This is a big boys and girls game. It's an assumption that people, may even have cards up their sleeves. It's an assumption. If you don't come with that to the table, then you're naive. On the other hand, what are the options? Well, we've seen some of the options applied throughout, right? The option to not diplomacy is war. It's on a continuum, diplomacy on the one side, war on the other. And even in war, there is still negotiations going on, but these are the two extremes. And we are suggesting here that this should have been either a capitulation on the Iranian side, they should just see the light that this is overwhelming, and they'll just say, we'll do everything you say. Or on the other hand, they should just fess up to everything and, just be nice and say this and that. That's not how international relations works. It is a fantasy world in which people say, we can't, of course you cannot trust them. So you make strong agreements and you make verifiable agreements on the assumption that, every nation will pursue its interests as it defines them. They also feel the same about the United States. I mean, there's a lot of baggage that comes to this table. Each side has its own file folder with grievances that they brought. And as soon as one side cites chapter and verse, the other one cites chapter and verse and produces documents. So, That's just the nature of things.
It seems to me from the earlier example that you cited, the Treaty of Versailles, about which the British historian E.H. Carr wrote a lovely little book called The 20 Years Crisis, in which he comes to the conclusion that a part of the reason for the Second World War was the harshness of the diplomacy that went into the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah.
So that could be an argument for negotiating and genuinely giving
and not
up some
humiliating
things.
the opponent.
And not humiliating the opponent.
And also the Treaty of Versailles is also another nice reminder of the failure of reaching one's goals. As you well know, much like in this case, the Republicans were extremely opposed to Woodrow Wilson. And America never ratified the treaty that he signed, creating the League of Nations, which resulted in World War II. Political scientists are very clear about this. The absence of America, and the reason they did not sign, the reasons were just as frivolous or weighty as the arguments are right now. At bottom, basically, it was this: we don't like you, Woodrow Wilson. And so they were in opposite world. Now, that said, there is a point we have to mention and we have to agree. Woodrow Wilson made a mistake. He should have included the Republicans. President Obama did make that mistake. He should have included, or at least alerted and kept informed on a point-to-point basis what is going on and sought advice. Whether they actually did that or not, I'm not privy to. One would assume that they know their history and they know these precedents. But here are two cases. In the one case, in the Treaty of Versailles and the creation of the League of Nations, it became disastrous for America. It had to be involved in another war. In this case, if America wants to scuttle this agreement, the result will very well be that Iran will immediately move forward. If they hadn't been doing it, they certainly will move forward, because this is now the signal that there is enmity here and they're under severe danger, and so they need to protect themselves.
Let's do one more point of contrast here. If we compare negotiation styles prior to and including in the post-war period, post-World War II, compare that to what is necessary today in an accelerated, globalized community. Are they the same? Do we have now a different environment qualitatively in which what might have been possible prior to this is no longer possible?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Henry Kissinger, being interviewed along this agreement, did mention the point that there are some things that you cannot do in the glare of cameras and 24-hour news cycles. Some of these things need to be off camera, off microphone, and they take longer time. I mean, he was famous for his shuttle diplomacy. He was very patient in trying to bring about the kinds of negotiations and negotiated ends to crises that he was working on. Yes, in a world of 24-hour news cycles, in a world where we're expecting results with 140 characters or less, in 30 seconds or less, it's not possible to have the kind of patience that it takes for something like this. It's actually, because I was observing this, as you yourself were, and others who are interested in these matters, it's actually a miracle that it did happen finally, that there was actually a signature, that the parties stayed. And it is really a testament to the fortitude, both on the Iranian side, on the side of Zarif, and on the American side of the Secretary of State, Kerry, that they managed, for instance, to take walks together.
Reminiscent of the Congress of Vienna.
Yes, or reminiscent of, Camp David, or reminiscent of great moments of diplomacy where you come to a conversation. We understand what our handlers are saying. The handlers are now staying 5 steps back. Let's just talk about this. Here is what we can do. Here's what we want to do. Great moments in Camp David where Carter reminded both of them, we are all grandfathers. We want to see a world in which our grandchildren, especially he reminded that Begin of that, So yeah, you need time. You need for things to mature. Diplomacy is not, Twitter universe. It takes more time. Now, you want something fast, you can bomb a place. But we know what the unintended consequences, or maybe intended sometimes, but unintended consequences of these things, these processes have been. And they're not, for this generation, it's been very, very traumatic for Americans to see the non-results of those kinds of pursuits.
We seem to forget so easily. We seem to remember every time we come to the end of a conflict, we can't do this anymore.
Right.
But then we seem to forget.
Yeah, then we seem to forget, yeah.
I was a participant in the Vietnam conflict, and I thought, well, surely we will
never do this again.
Remember.
Yeah.
We didn't remember.
Yeah.
Instead, we came so quickly to the position of a quick, and maybe that's really the answer to the fundamental question of why we do this. We're interested in rapid solutions.
Yeah, I think it is part of the nature of the American political system, though I don't want to just limit it to this system. Other countries have done similar things. But the American political cycle is a very fast cycle. It's a 2-year cycle, basically.
Yeah.
On a 2-year cycle, it's hard to speak long range. Even when you have a president with 2 terms in office, and many of them don't make it to 2 terms. 2 terms is 8 years. That's sufficient time to kind of, sow seeds that might actually come to fruition, and then you can, see the fruits of your labor. But a 2-year cycle does not allow that. And the congressional cycle basically has become a 2-year cycle. And now with the presidential campaigns kind of moving into that, we are now 2 years away from this, talking about the election coming up. Everything is basically on this accelerated pace. And with this kind of accelerated pace, the people who are listening to this, the public, they want results. They don't want to have to wait for another 2 years. In fact, many people in the previous presidential round, they thought that the conventions and the nomination process were the outcome of the election. So when they saw the balloons and the confetti come down, they thought that this is the person who's going to be president. And to their surprise, there were 2 of them, so that was a bit confusing. People want immediate results. We are now in this accelerated world. Our students are on 30-second attention spans. If you give them a lecture that is 1 hour and 20 minutes, it is, to some of them, it is just this drawn-out conversation. Why can't we get to the point? In fact, often they interrupt your lecture and say, and where is that in the chapter, and is this going to be on the midterm? When you're just trying to have a conversation, kind of bringing in, not just starting from Adam and Eve, obviously, but just bringing in some of the complexities of things, and they just want immediate results. And that's basically the culture we're in, the global culture we're in. We are instantly connected to the entire globe at any point, 24 hours during the day. And so if you want to actually have a longer, drawn-out process, it doesn't fit into that mold. That's why it's even a wonder that there are still PBS News hours where there are no advertisings, where people sit down and have conversations. They have to be on publicly funded channels because the CNN or all of that just does not have the time for that kind of exploration of issues.
Yeah, it's been said that patience is a virtue, just not one of ours. But I don't think that Americans are particularly unique. I think the age in which we live now,
it's the age, definitely.
where there is this instantaneous news cycle, not even a 24-hour cycle. It's right then, there.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I want to make sure this point is brought home. It's not an American disease or phenomenon. It's a
Oh.
global one now.
Yes.
Everybody wants the instant answer to everything, and it's very frustrating if it takes more than, the X amount of time that clip does allow.
So as you imagine John Kerry walking with his counterpart, with his handlers 5 feet behind, can you imagine a situation, or a conversation rather, in which the two of them might be talking about their respective political limitations
Yeah.
and the kinds of expectations that they're having to deal with, and maybe even the development, as we talked about them in the 1970s, confidence-building measures
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
take small baby steps and move us toward a situation in which the United States and Iran could take up normalized relationships.
In the case of those two individuals, those two really super diplomats, and we really have to give credit to them. I mean, they, in this day and age, they are really exceptional individuals, both of them. In the case of them, they really came up with confidence-building measures, and they became, if not friends, partners in this negotiation. Whether or not Iran and America will normalize relations, I think it's a bit too soon for that. But now, on the heels of the reopening of the Cuba embassy and the Cuban embassy in Washington, a lot of people were saying, what's next? Are we going to be... I don't think that will quite happen yet. It's too soon. And one really shouldn't push for those kinds of things, whatever the meaning of that might be. Confidence-building measures are better in the background, and one should let them mature for a while. There are legitimate issues on both sides. The Iranians crossed some lines. The Americans had crossed some lines and crossed them after the revolution, definitely. There's no question. Whether the Americans will acknowledge that or not, but at least it's an acknowledged fact in the rest of the world that Americans crossed some lines afterwards. When the airliner was shot down under President Reagan's presidency, he did acknowledge that was a mistake. That was an amazing step forward. Normally those things are not done, and the Iranians accepted that, But more such steps need to be taken. There have been some developments, positive developments in Iran. As I said, the election of this more moderate president. Whether or not this president, of course, everybody knows that the president of Iran is not really the person who is leading this chariot, but that is a signal that things are changing. The fact that they're toning down the rhetoric that has been ingrained in everyone, America, the great Satan, down with America, death to America, they're toning that down. They're even erasing some of the graffiti on the walls that say that. That here, Iran is not referred to as the axis of evil anymore. Those are things, but it takes time. Some of it is silly, as those of us who are getting a bit older, you think to yourself, seriously, children, let's get on with it. But yes, it may sound childish at one point, but no, it just takes time, Yeah. It's in the textbooks, it's in the daily conversation, it takes time. Will it happen? It has to happen, of course. And by the way, there has always been an introspection of America in Iran through the Swiss embassy. And there's always been an introspection of Iran in Washington, D.C. through the Pakistan embassy. So it's not like they hadn't had representation. It's just they don't have their official representation.
Yeah. Well, I would certainly look forward to that. Is the situation as it's being played out with ISIS being a primary player, is that complicating things between the United States and Iran?
It's become very complicated because there are so many hands, not in this agreement. In this agreement there are many hands, and this is one thing Americans also need to understand. This isn't just an agreement between Iran and America. This is an agreement between the 5 veto powers of the Security Council, plus Germany, and Europe as an observer, and Iran. So very, very complicated, 6-7 way deal. And then also the situation of Iran's involvement in the Middle East and other factors involved right on the border of Iran and in the vicinity of Iran, amongst them being ISIS in Iraq, very, very much complicate things, not just with ISIS, but also with the Kurds, and now the Turks bombing the Kurds, which will have some impact on Iran because the Turks and the Iranians were very close. But the Iranians are also supporting the Kurds, and it is getting extremely complicated. And in all of this, America is trying to make sense, as Mr. Trump the other day was trying to figure out whether it's Quds or whether it's Kurds and couldn't quite distinguish between the two. Americans are trying to distinguish all of these foreign names and who's running around and who's doing what. And I get emails inviting me to the ISIS conference, and I'm thinking, oh my God, please no. And it's the Iranian Studies, the International Society for Iranian Studies, the acronym of which happens to be ISIS too. So it gets very complicated. Yeah. These matters, in fact, on this point, to be serious about it, on this point, America and Iran have common interests. And just as in many regions of the world, America and the Soviet Union had common interests and could come to agreements even though they were not trumpeted around the world. America and Iran have common interests, and Iran can handle some of those matters, which America at this point is in no position to do. The Iranians have assisted the Americans against the Taliban in Afghanistan, and the Iranians can assist, whether or not officially, but can assist in something that benefits America with regard to ISIS in Iraq, most definitely. Right now, the force that stands in front of ISIS in Iraq is mostly the Shia force of Iraq and the Shia force of Iran. These are the ones who are, that's what ISIS respects in that region. And of course, then the Kurds, all of which Iran has influence over. If that was your question.
That was my question in the last 20 seconds of our program. Do you have any words of advice for President Obama at this point?
Advice. I want to congratulate him on his fortitude and tenacity and the cool that he's kept. And I'm really happy for him. He now has a record of achievements. And I wish him well on the upcoming vote, which it seems he has enough people in his camp to make sure that his veto will not be overridden and that the agreement actually will become law.
Manu Eskandari, thank you for being with us once again and for helping us understand this very complex issue.
Thank
for
you.
Global Studies and I should say global dialogue, I'm Peter Hasland. Good night.